So next, we have corrupt governments as a possible modern age problem. Now, the reason why we're talking about corrupt governments after the other two is because when it comes to things like climate change or things like weapons of mass destruction or AI, well, it's the government's responsibility to make sure that we are treating the environment properly, to make sure that we are limiting our warmongering, our, sending out soldiers and battling and taking resources. It is the government's responsibility to also ensure that when we have new technology, it is used for good and not for evil, right? So corrupt governments, governments that have sort of broken systems that only benefit a few and not the whole country they're supposed to, could be considered a bigger problem than the others. So if you think that, here are some things you might want to talk about. So the first is corporate influence. And what that means is money being what's influencing policies, what's influencing lawmaking. And not money in the sense of helping the government to spend money wisely, but money being used for unnecessary things or to benefit businesses or people that don't really help the majority of people living somewhere. So, in other words, maybe these large companies, these huge companies, are paying government officials to pass laws that benefit the business. Maybe it allows them to produce more than should be allowed because their business is doing a lot of pollution. Could be an example of that. But I'll leave it up to you to kind of find other ways that maybe money can influence the government in a bad way. Next, this one, it sounds like a really complicated thing, modern kleptocracies. And what that just means is the government has a system that isn't working for the people. The money that a country's people is paying to the government, which is supposed to help them, whether that's with health insurance or things that are available to the public, like libraries, post offices. Instead, that money is being siphoned, it's being redirected to go somewhere else. And it's not going to things that help the public. So, again, sort of the difference between the first two is with corporate influence, we see businesses paying people in the government to pass laws that really only benefit the business and might actually help them do things that could harm the environment or make more weapons or use AI in a way that is unethical, in a way that's bad. And the modern kleptocracy is more of government officials stealing money. So, like the president taking money from the government that people pay taxes toward and using it in a way that benefits him or benefits other government officials. So they're stealing money from the government. Another thing that causes a corrupt government is when the power of the government is only in the hands of a few people. So if there are some governments that have modern dictatorships where the person who is ahead, like the president, the dictator, has all of the power. They can do anything they want. And when that happens, usually they will use that power to only benefit themselves. They will only pass policies that make sure that they have the most money, the most resources, the most everything, it all goes to one or a collection of a few people. And when we look at history, we can actually see this going back to the ancient world. If we look at the Roman Republic, you can even look at with Caesar, that we see the power concentrated in a few. So with Caesar, he was collecting all of the power for himself. But we also saw different versions of the Roman Republic where they had a group of people who were elected called the Senate. But really the only people involved in the Senate were all very wealthy individuals. And so all they did was just pass laws to make themselves more wealthy. So I think that would be a good place to look at it. And you'll notice what's missing here is the idea of a solution. And that's something I think that you'll need to really think about if you want to choose this one, on how do we fix a corrupt government? Because sometimes with the government, it might be the system itself. The voting is not working. Especially if we get, one corrupt president and another corrupt president, another. So what other options do we have to stop a government that is only listening to people who pays it money, or is stealing money, or is making sure that all of the power only goes to one or a few people? I'll leave that up to you to think about. But this is also a very good one because, as I said, it is responsible for some of the others we've talked about, and even some of the ones we're going to talk about next. And speaking of which, let's move on to our next one. So another modern age issue is the idea of global hunger. Hungry people around the world. So last I checked, there are about 733 million people that are starving in the world today. And that is strange because right now we do have a food surplus. That means we produce more food than we have people in the world, which means we have the ability to feed these 733 million people. So why don't we? That's why it's a modern issue, right? But of course, people being hungry, mass amounts of people being hungry, didn't come from just the modern era. We've seen it as far back as the ancient world, where there were local famines. Usually, these were caused by if there was drought, so no rainfall for long periods of time, the crops dry up, or even conflict. When there were wars, oftentimes, in order to win the war, soldiers would burn down farms to make sure that the other side, whoever they were fighting, couldn't, reuse the fields in order to get more food for their soldiers. But this, of course, led to the starvation of those villages or regions that used those farms. And some possible examples of this. Now, I have here that I put the Irish potato famine, which occurred from a natural disaster in Ireland from 1845 to 1852. And it was worsened by political indifference. So again, here's the idea of corrupt government being involved. And it cost a lot of lives. But one that you might be more familiar with is you could also use the idea of during the French Revolution, when the people were starving and Marie Antoinette and King Louis the 16th, I believe, were so unaware of how the lower class people were living that they were starving. And that's what sparked the revolution. So we also have an example from the revolutionary time period, the Age of Revolution. Both of those, the Irish potato famine or the French Revolution, would be good to talk about with global hunger and us sort of ignoring it. Like I said, with the idea of we have a food surplus, but there are still 733 million people starving, connects both to the Irish potato famine and French Revolution. And possible solutions are, of course, just better agricultural practices, better farming practices, but also wealth distribution or redistribution, which by wealth redistribution, I mean the resources, the food. How can we make businesses, instead of, oh, this food's about to go bad, let's donate it to people who can eat it rather than just throwing it away and putting it in the trash? How can we stop so much food from being thrown away when there are still people hungry? So these are the kind of solutions you want to think about. And lastly, we have animal endangerment, or endangered animals and animal extinction as one of our possible big modern age issues. So this, of course, is how the influence of people has caused certain plants and animal life to go extinct. They are no longer found anywhere on Earth. And the reason why we're talking about this one last is because it is a part of some of the others that we've talked about. For example, some of the reason why we've seen an extinction rate of 1,000 times the natural rate. In other words, the rate that normal evolution might cause, like an animal that just didn't evolve in order to survive, has to do with our first topic, climate change. The Earth is rapidly heating and rapidly cooling in summer and winter, and it is causing some species to not be able to handle these temperatures, as well as us destroying habitat, like cutting down more trees, building more cities. The pollution that we're creating is causing weaker species to die at much faster rates. And so we have created things like, for example, AI is currently doing things to help preserve the biodiversity. In other words, the many different kinds of animal life. And especially I've seen some that have to do with trying to save the coral reefs. Because right now, due to climate change, the coral reefs are currently dying out. And so it connects to AI in that sense. But historically, we've also seen things like the dodo. The dodo is one of the first instances where people realized that they have a direct impact on animal life, that animals don't just somehow keep existing if we overhunt them, if we overuse them, and if we destroy their habitat. So in this case, within 80 years of human contact, suddenly the dodo, which existed on this one island alone, gone. And so this is when it sort of started and changed how we view our responsibilities to the environment. But it's not just there. You could also write about, I believe, the tigers in Korea were all hunted to extinction. As far as ancient Egypt, there was a particular plant that they used for a kind of medicine that they ended up pulling and using to extinction. So there are many different instances in history that you could use to kind of reinforce that this is not something that's necessarily new, but it is happening at a rate much higher than before. Last I read, I think it was anywhere between 200 and 2,000 species of animals go extinct every year due to human interference. And of course, the possible solutions to these are going to be protection, protect their habitats, protect the animals that are being hunted in any way possible, especially when it comes to target key species, the ones that we know are not thriving. And then, of course, like I said, we could have a possible solution as keep preparing AI to help us handle and mitigate or control human consumption. Also, trying to deal with climate change will also help the animals and plant life that are being affected. Even you could talk about, getting rid of corrupt governments. If governments are accepting money from businesses to allow them to do practices that are allowing them to pollute or destroy the environment, we can target those as all possible solutions. And again, that's why I wanted to do this one last, is that it is included in just about everything we've talked about so far. And actually with that, we are all done now. Again, there are plenty of other issues that go on with our modern age, but I want you to approach, if you decide to choose them, in the same way where, what is it? Where can we trace it back in human history? What is an event from history that is similar? Not exactly the same, because of course, different times, things change, but our problems don't really change. They just kind of change shape. And then, of course, the solutions, we can even look at the other problems to find solutions to them in the same way that we're doing here with animal extinction and endangerment. So yeah, lots to think about. And with that is all the time we have for today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and until next time, goodbye.